In today's video, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to react to a video which I came across like literally a couple of days ago, and it's just been on my mind. And it's been on my mind because of the person that they're speaking about. Now, Gary Stevenson, I know him. He's a great guy. I was one of the first people to give him a platform on YouTube. He's been on my channel maybe about 3 years ago. I'll link some of the videos down below. And he's been consistent with his message around wealth inequality and the fact that we actually need to do something about it. And the fact that as a populace, we need to demand that change happens, right? There is absolutely nothing wrong with his argument. Now, obviously, since I had him on my channel, he's gone on to do great things. Fantastic book. He's getting some real great exposure at the moment. The biggest of which is probably Dara CEO, because that's been one of the big appearances that he's made that has got so much view and so much visceral reaction. And I want to react to a visceral reaction to him being on that show in this video, because we are going to watch two people talk about Gary having not a clue about who he is, what his views are, what his assertions are, nothing. It's just an exchange based on nothing but, I guess, first impressions and opinion. And to be honest, I shouldn't really be surprised, because who we're talking about here is Rob Moore. Rob Moore, who is super, super, super about getting a reaction. He will say the most ridiculous things on LinkedIn and across social media for a reaction. He's a clickbait merchant. But let's just watch this exchange between him and the guy that Gary debated on Diary of a CEO. Now, if you've watched it, you tell me who you think won that debate, who you think came across better in that debate. I think they both had very, very good points. But who won? In my head, what Gary was saying was 100% true. But let's see how this exchange starts.
Is Gary Stevenson somewhat on the edge of a nervous breakdown?
Really? So, you don't agree with what a fella's saying, and because you don't agree, he has to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Fantastic smart start.
He's definitely sitting on a lot of anger. He's angry, which I understand. From his point of view, wealth inequality is something to be very angry about. The people who,
if you're not wealthy, it is something to potentially be angry about, because when we start looking at data, and I'll show you some data in a minute. When we start looking at data, the rate at which we have wealth inequality is ridiculous. And I've spoken about a number of times on this channel how I have a personal battle with this idea of capitalism and how it works to benefit people. Because really, that's what the Western society and economy has been built on, capitalism, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But there is a point to which maybe it becomes counterproductive. And this is the point that we're at. So the question here, let me know in the comment section, is Gary angry or frustrated? Which one do you think he is?
who are relating to his content, they want a voice of anger.
Is he angry with the wrong people?
Yeah, he's misguided. He's definitely misguided.
Who do they assume that he's angry at or frustrated with? Because that statement right there perhaps suggests that they think that he's angry with the billionaires and the millionaires, entrepreneurs who have built businesses. I would disagree. I would say that Gary is frustrated and maybe even angry at the government and the politicians that allow a system to exist where wealth inequality has gotten so large. That's who I think Gary is angry or perhaps even frustrated with. What do you think?
Got it. He's very low resolution. He has a very low resolution view of the world, which is,
What do you mean?
well, there's no real nuance. It's essentially wealth inequality is getting worse, in his opinion, right? He doesn't share a lot of facts or data. He doesn't actually tell you where he draws that opinion from other than personal.
Rubbish. Gary actually does show facts and figures. Now, this is where I'm saying he didn't do any research, because if he had been on Gary's channel, then he would have known, just going back, and let me just share this screen with you, he would know that if you went back on Gary's archives from like 4 years ago, I'd have to go all the way down here. And let me just find one of those videos where he talks about the data and stuff like that. What is wealth? Where he explains it. And he also talks about wealth inequality, right? What if we fix it? He shares stats, numbers, his background, his foundation for his thesis, and his understanding and his thought process in those videos right there. But clearly, this guy has done zero research, like nada, nilpois, zero research in preparation to meet Gary for a conversation on Diary of CEO.
Personal anecdotes and personal observation, which is fine. That may be where he draws it, but he never shared
Personal observation in the fact that Gary is a multimillionaire who made a lot of money in the financial system and has been exposed to how wealthy people can use instruments to shelter their wealth from the taxman. And there is a conversation to be had around whether or not us watching this, me even commenting on this, whether as a society we're a bunch of hypocrites. Because I remember about a year ago or so, I posted a poll on Instagram, and it was around about the time when Rishi Sunak's wife got exposed for not paying tax, and the fact that she paid this fee to HMRC to avoid paying millions in tax. And I asked people, if you were in her position, would you have paid the tax? And overwhelmingly, people said, no, I would have done exactly what she did. All the while, though, in the media and on social media, people are completely and utterly outraged. So I do think there is a little bit of hypocrisy in the fact that in an ideal world, we want people to be taxed more at the upper echelons of wealth. But if we find ourselves in that position, we would probably take the loophole as well. That's another societal conversation altogether. But let's continue.
shares any broader research. So wealth inequality is getting worse. The rich are responsible and are accumulating too much wealth, and therefore the only solution is to tax wealth. And that's it. That's the whole.
He's not saying it's the only solution. He's saying it's one of the solutions, because the reality is that actually there is a huge wealth divide. And let me just stop sharing my screen right here, because what I do want to do is I just want to take you through some actual data points. Actually, I'm going to share this screen. I use ChatGPT for this, and anyone can do this and verify all of the sources as well, okay? So this is from ChatGPT. Which one am I looking at here? I'm looking at this one right here. So this is for the US and the UK. So the top 1%, this is looking at wealth share. As of Q4 2021, the top 1% of US household held approximately 30.9% of the nation's wealth, while the bottom 50% held just 2.6%. That was in 2021. I would hazard a guess that it's so much larger now. Stock ownership concentration. The wealthiest 10% of Americans own 93% of all US stocks, highlighting the concentration of financial assets. That's according to Vox.com. Income disparities. In 2021, the richest 1% of household earned, on average, 339 times more than the bottom 20%. Median wealth. In 2023, the median wealth per adult in the US was $112,000. This is the one that sticks out to me. The wealthiest 10% own 93% of US stocks. Now, if you think about the stock market as a place where you're able to grow your wealth, that is a huge disparity and a huge problem. Let's have a look at some UK data. Wealth distribution between April 2020 and March 2022, the wealthiest 10% of UK's households possessed 43% of total wealth, whereas the bottom 50% held just 9%. That's according to equalitytrust.org. 43% owned of total wealth owned by the top 10% households, whilst the bottom 50% own just 9%. Wealth inequality measure. The Gini coefficient for total household wealth during this period was 0.59%, indicating high level of wealth inequality. Medium household wealth. Household wealth was £293,700, with 14% of households holding 1 million or more, and 12% holding less than £20,000. Income inequality. The financial year ended 2020, the Gini coefficient for disposable income rose 36.5%. Now, you tell me that these are not staggering numbers, and these are factual numbers that we know is adding to the way people feel day to day in this country, and is also apparent in the way that the fact that the UK at the moment is broke, but somehow we have a lot of wealthy people with a lot of money, where perhaps a 1% tax on over £10 million in assets might actually help the bigger picture. Let's just go back to what they're saying.
That's the whole argument there. Gary makes no distinction between the assets that billionaires own, the profits that sit inside their companies, and the revenues that they make as just the revenue of their business. He interchanges those three things completely. He also really makes no distinction between what is wealth. Wealth in his mind is houses. If you own houses, that's it, you've got wealth. But he doesn't take into consideration that Dyson is a $30 billion company or whatever it is, and it's mostly intangible assets.
You see what this guy's doing here. He's actually, I don't want to say it's a straw man argument here, but what he's doing is, he is basically assuming that Gary's talking about businesses. Gary's not talking about businesses. We're not talking about businesses here. Businesses operate different to individuals. What we're talking about here is individuals. Individuals who have wealth, who have accumulated assets. A business, we're not talking about that. Okay? Yes, we can talk about whether or not Apple should be paying taxes. That's another stream, but that's not the core argument. We're talking about individuals here. Individuals who have made a lot of money from businesses, from sales of businesses, who dump the money, the proceeds, into assets and have enough income coming in that they can buy up more assets to ensure that the middle class, which is where social mobility becomes very important, don't have the ability to compete. Because as this money is going into these individuals with lots of money and they're buying more assets, that drives up asset prices, which in itself singles and excludes the middle class and prevents them from getting those assets. That's the entire conversation here. So this guy doesn't even understand the basic premise of what Gary's talking about, in the fact that we're talking about individuals who have been able to amass loads of money and assets, and those people are not able to be taxed because they're able to use loopholes and advisory services that allow them to exploit those loopholes. He just does not understand the fundamental premise, which is why I said earlier, he has not done any research. He didn't do any research whatsoever.
Or that INEOS is actually a global network of chemical production plants, and most of them aren't even in the UK.
But he might be talking.
But what we're talking about here is not INEOS. We're talking about the individuals who own INEOS. Surgeon, Ratcliffe. That's what we're talking about here, not the company.
Talking about working class,
yeah,
where most of their wealth probably is in their house.
Yeah, but he when he talks about taxing billionaires, he only really talks about the idea that billionaires own houses. So in Gary's imagination, billionaires own houses and they all produce 5% yield, and there's no cost for running them, and there's no debt on those houses.
Let's skip past this. At least Rob will be happy that he's earned a little bit of AdSense for us watching this, by the way. So let's skip this.
So that's what...
I mean, if you want to become a billionaire in real estate, you have to leverage.
Yeah.
You have to have debt.
Yeah. So, and are there any houses that require no work and spit out 5% per year, and that you just don't know? Right. So,
see, that laugh is so put on and so freaking pathetic, right? Because again, they're both missing the point, and they're intentionally trying to make jest of this because they're missing the point. albeit they don't know that they're missing the point, which actually does make this hilarious. Okay, so what they're arguing is, well, in order, and again, because they're talking about businesses here, because you operate in a sector or an industry, there are costs to operate in that sector or industry, i.e., developing, employing people. That's not what we're talking about. A business operates as a business, has its own running cost. The profits from said business that enriches the business owner, which he then transfers into personal holdings and buys assets with, is what we're talking about. They fundamentally do not get it.
So,
I mean, the upkeep on some of this stuff would be crazy.
of
The yields
course.
in London are really low.
it's like 3% gross in London.
You're lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once you actually zero out any costs of running it, you're lucky.
And inflation.
Yeah, exactly. You're lucky if you keep anything.
But he's an economist, isn't he? Because he's called Gary's Economics.
He says this thing over and over. They're making passive income, and then they're squeezing you out. So
they are making passive income. Like, the thing is, and this is the insidious part to this guy knows that they make passive income. He probably makes passive income from whatever investments, whatever in assets he has. This idea that everyone lends against their assets, yes, that is true, but not in 100% of the cases. There will be people who will have cash set aside that will be generating a passive income for them, or whether it be in, say, properties that are generating an income for them. There is no way that this guy can possibly believe that that statement is untrue. But I think he's trying to argue as though we should believe that it is true.
His imagination is that the billionaires, they make all of this money, it's all liquid, then they transfer that into middle-class housing somehow. They somehow have all of this cash with no debt and no costs associated. They then buy up all the middle-class housing and squeeze everyone out. And then they earn 5% passive income, which they reinvest into owning more houses in the middle class, which I don't know any billionaire that does anything like this plan. If all the billionaires I know have created companies that become very worth a lot on paper.
Well, the very, very few billionaires in property, because there's very few, because I'm in property, is generational wealth.
Also, most billionaires in property are probably on the development side, where they're developing and they're moving stock through, like they're actually producing better homes. So a lot of the times, if you're
and
rich,
generating tax revenue.
You would know, if you're rich in property, it's probably because you're buying dilapidated stock and bringing it back into the market,
where you hire all the laborers. And you create economy.
And so this is what they're talking about business. Like, no one's going to give you credit for this because it is the function of business, right? It is the function of business. And if I were a cynical person, I could then say, well, actually, maybe, just maybe, we can start getting into the conversation of how much you pay these people that you're employing, and whether or not you're paying them sufficiently so they can actually have a better quality of life, right? We can go down all kinds of rabbit holes here, but fundamentally, these two are missing the point. Now, on this conversation about billionaires, generally, yes, they have built businesses. And generally, if you look at someone like Elon Musk, for example, he will borrow against the value of Tesla, for example, for his cash flow. He doesn't necessarily have to take an income from the business or be paid a salary. He will use debt. He will leverage debt against his Tesla shares, right? And that's how, because there is no tax on a loan on debt, he can get away with not paying any tax. But that's the whole point. Should that be allowed at that level? And that's really the fundamental question that is being asked and prodded by Gary. Should we not think about the system that allows a billionaire to borrow against his holdings in his company and get away with paying zero tax at a personal level? Of course, the company Tesla is going to pay tax, is going to pay tax on employ people, which generates tax revenue. But that's as a byproduct of doing business. You don't get brownie points for that, mate.
And you create houses. Or you're putting up new buildings, which you've done.
Or renovate existing ones, dilapidate.
So then you go from, there was no 200 houses, now there's 200 houses. So
we're solving a problem the government aren't.
Yeah, exactly. And also, there's huge costs associated with it. There's not this idea that you're suddenly sitting on all this money and there's no debt and all that sort of stuff. So
that's the cost of doing business.
Low resolution view. Because of that low resolution view of how it works, he's just missing the obvious angles for people to leave.
He's missed the obvious angle that Gary's coming at. Now they're going to talk about the fact that people can leave, and that is true. People can leave. Oh, let's go back here.
In order for you to get ahead, you have to become a dentist. You're like, I don't want to be a dentist. Right? Like,
Yeah, but being an entrepreneur, you can start a business in anything you want. It's kind of not an accurate analogy.
but the vast majority of people don't want to do that. And I'm not against them for that.
Yeah.
Like, by the way, I've never said everyone needs to be an entrepreneur. Never said that.
Simon Squibb does.
He does, and I disagree with him.
I disagree with him. He would walk.
That is one thing that I can agree with these guys on. I do not like Simon Squibb and his rhetoric. It's all great trying to inspire people, but running your own venture, going at it alone is hard. It's hard. It's stressful. Like, it's not for everyone. And this guy just, I don't think he's rooted in reality, and me personally, I think that he sets people up for failure because oftentimes people don't necessarily realize how hard the road to run your own business is. I'll definitely agree with both of them on this point.
Walk into cafes and say, "Oh, quit, start your dream." If he walked into my business and told some of my staff to quit, I'd headbutt him.
But it could also, let's say you didn't, it could also be a disaster for them.
Of course. Like, you need employees. Employees need employers.
Forgetting that, the idea that everyone should be a founder, it's an incredibly stressful job.
Yeah.
It's a dedicated set of skills that most people don't have.
And it would make a very top-heavy society organizationally. You couldn't have it. You can't physically have it.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, maybe with AI and robots you could, that everyone could have extremely small teams, lean teams, and everyone could be a co-founder. But I mean, that's not at all what I've ever said.
No.
I've only ever said, look, I have said this. I'll tell you what I've regularly said. I've said everyone can be more entrepreneurial.
A little bit more AdSense for Rob Moore here. Let's just skip that though.
Or surely everyone can improve their life. Is that not what we should be talking about?
So everyone can improve their life through personal agency and better decisions.
So you could go from 35 grand a year to 47 grand a year.
Or you could be happier with better decisions, or you could be healthier with better decisions.
Or you could try and get a new, better job, or develop your career.
You could negotiate a pay rise.
Yeah. I mean, Tim Cook wasn't an entrepreneur.
No, he's a billionaire. He's a billionaire. Yeah. So I really believe that there is personal agency,
i.e., take responsibility for where you are and desire and make changes to improve.
Yeah.
So why do people like Gary Stevenson hate that message? Why do they?
He doesn't. Gary does not hate that message. Gary has never been on record to tell you not to work hard. Gary has never been on record telling people don't take agency. What Gary has done, in my opinion, and maybe this is where sometimes when I watch Gary, I'm like, okay, you could be a little bit more encouraging in your videos. But what Gary's message is that it is a very, very difficult world. And unfortunately, the odds are stacked against you if you come from certain backgrounds like his and like mine. That's just the freaking truth. I never should have found myself in Canary Wharf. I didn't get into Canary Wharf a lot of the time for the longest time because I didn't go to university. I didn't have a university degree. Until a company was looking for someone who actually could take no and keep going back. And that's been my character and what I built because I've been homeless, because I've been broke. So these opportunities just don't come along. Like when I worked in Canary Wharf, I remember my first day there being really intimidated, feeling really out of place because I'm thinking all of these guys went to university and Eton and they're all like very well connected. They come from wealthy families and all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, how am I going to fit in here? And then you very quickly realize that actually these guys, whilst they have connections and yes, they've gone to university and Eton and they're connected in that way, a lot of them are freaking idiots. Like there was a guy on our floor, I remember, he was such a wet lettuce. Like, honestly, this guy was so gormless. It was unbelievable. Like, tie your own shoes, mate. Like, give him that task and see how well he gets on. And there are people like that in positions that people like Gary and myself fight tooth and nail to get into, only to realize that someone like this guy who's a wet lettuce gets there because his family is connected. Because, oh, his dad golfs with someone who's the CEO or the MD of a large company. This is the backdrop of the reality from which Gary is coming from. And which is why his message is resonating with so many people in the country. I mean, look, how many followers has he got now on YouTube? Like, let me just double check this actually. Gary has now go all the way to the top here, 1.26 million subscribers. I promise you, when he was on my channel like 3 years ago, I think he had like 100 subscribers. So he's done this within a short period of time with a very pointed, purposeful message. Yet these two completely got the wrong end of the stick, have no idea what they're talking about, and are mischaracterizing what Gary is trying to communicate because they are just not willing to listen. And that is the problem with our society these days.
They
They
just
can't.
say,
They can't.
if you're never going to be richer than your dad.
It's a slippery slope. For if you're a socialist or a communist or a Marxist, it's a very, very, very slippery slope to admit that people have agency.
Right, let me read what he said. The rich are becoming more fucking richer, and the poor, well, I guess they'll just die. That's what Gary Stevenson said, word for word. Why are people lapping up his shit?
What's untrue about that, though? The rich are getting richer, and the poor. Look, let's just take the UK, for example, right? If you're a multimillionaire, you can afford the best medical insurance money could buy. Yet, if you are on benefits, and let's just say you have the suspicion that you've got a heart attack, for fucking example, you go to the NHS right now, you've got to sit there for 18 to 24 hours to get a freaking bed. And I know this because I was in hospital last year with chest pains, and it took me 18 hours to get into a bed. So, what is so controversial? What is so incorrect about what Gary stated there? And this is where you start to realize where these people live and in what sphere they exist and operate in. Because Rob, millionaire, the other guy, millionaire, so detached from reality. And this is one of the things that I love about Gary. Yes, he's a multimillionaire, but would you ever know it to look at him? You look at Rob though. Look at his top. How expensive is that, by the way? Clear difference, right? People come from different perspectives. And the reality is, Gary has not forgotten what it was like when he was a kid in East London, dreaming about the future. I don't know, I've not asked him this question. Did he ever think that he was going to get to a stage where he is today? Did he even think it was possible when he was a kid? I have no fucking idea. But these guys live in a completely different reality, which is why, look, there is some merit in what they're saying around the fact that, not everyone should be entrepreneur, should be a business owner. And I think anyone who follows anyone who says this needs to be very, very careful because oftentimes they're selling you something, but they fundamentally got the wrong end of the stick with everything that Gary is trying to say here. And look, I'm going to link this video so you can go and watch this separately. We're literally 6 minutes, 59 seconds into a 12 minute and 7 second session of an overall much, much longer podcast. And to be honest, I've just had enough, really, to be honest, because they're just talking absolute nonsense. And I don't normally swear on this channel because I try to keep it clean. But when people just don't understand and try to attack a very fundamental principle, it's okay for you to be a millionaire and think, okay, maybe I might not agree with it, but is there merit in what he's saying? There is no desire to try and see if there's any merit in what he's saying. They don't like it because they are the very people that Gary is talking about. They are the very people that Gary is saying should be taxed more. And again, there is a huge conversation to be had around, are we being hypocritical as a society? Because I think if many people, and don't get me wrong, it is extremely hard. If you're an entrepreneur, and this is where I have an issue with capitalism, this is where it comes from. If you're an entrepreneur, you started your business, you took all that risk, you worked your absolute tits off, and you got to the point where you actually got to achieve financial freedom for your family. knowing where income tax rates are, and the fact that you're going to get taxed on the way out when you die. So you can't even pass this stuff over to your kids when you die. I can see where the argument is. But does that mean that what Gary is saying is fundamentally wrong? Absolutely not. I don't. And so, look, I think as a society, if anyone and all of us got to the stage where we were entrepreneurial, had a business, and we're worth 10 million quid, of course we would not want to pay as much tax. But that is our stance. If the government said that everyone who has assets over 20 million pounds, for example, we're going to apply a 1% charge, one-off charge. It might be difficult to swallow, but for those people who are willing, it would make a huge, huge difference. I'm not a millionaire, so I don't know how I would feel if I was in Rob's position or other people's position. And I'm sure this will be a conversation point in the comments and all this kind of stuff, because I understand where wealthy people come from when they talk about the tax position. I do. I completely understand it. But my argument in where I agree with Gary is that we do need a government that at least has a look at how do we reduce the wealth gap and that wealth inequality. How do you reduce that? I don't have the answers for that. I'm not sure that anyone really has the answers for that, but at least it's something as a society we should be talking about. All right. I know there will be a ton of people who watch this channel will be like, Pete, I can't believe you're taking this point. But two things can be true at the same time. It can be true that, yes, whilst we want to make sure that we are being as tax efficient as possible and trying to keep as much money of ours that we possibly can away from the taxman within the remits of the law, which is what you would argue rich people are doing. And I would completely agree with that. I've been a financial advisor. I've structured some of these things for people. Like, they are in the remit of the law. But does that not mean it could also be true, I should say, that maybe the government needs to have a look at how they try to at least get a little bit more out, close some loopholes for the betterment of society? I don't know. Let me know what you think. I'm sure it's going to be a ruckus in the comment section. But hey, let's have a conversation. Catch you in a bit.